So we've got about 20 people in the room. So I'll start with introduction. Welcome to the third in the series of talks around the exhibition Another World is Possible. The exhibition is currently on at Peacock Visual Arts in Aberdeen, where both Ian and Andy Rigby are sitting at the moment. Aberdeen People's Press operated between 1973 and 1984, publishing a fortnightly alternative local newspaper, pamphlets and books, as well as providing a printing service for a wide range of radical groups, community newspapers, trade unions, and campaign organizations. In addition to this printing and publishing activities, Aberdeen People's Press also acted as a hub, a meeting place for many of the city's activist groups, a node in a wide network of people and communities across the city, Scotland, and the UK. Andy and Ian will be sharing an in conversation called Diggers and Dreamers, Prefiguring the Future. In the 1970s, we were dreaming of a different kind of social order permeated by human values and concerns that privilege the commonweal as against the drive to private power and profit. At Aberdeen People's Press, we were digging in the sense of working practically to sow the seeds of that new utopian vision. Turning to the present, we have the sense that the main driver of activism for change is the determination to avert the worst kind of dystopia, the collapse of our common home, climate crisis, and the struggle to reclaim welfare rights and human dignity that has affected so many in the years of austerity. So in conversation, our two contributors will be asking the question, has there been a loss of vision? If so, does it matter? Ian Baird was involved in APP. Ian sitting to the left of the screen was involved in APP between 1975 and 1984 when it closed down. After meeting APP sellers in local pubs on his return to Aberdeen after a spell in London, he joined the group and quickly became involved in the printing side, in the digging side of the operation when it moved to its premises in King Street in 1976, just around the corner from us here at the Castlegate. He was actually actively involved in APP's transition to becoming a registered workers' cooperative and continued with cooperative development initiatives after the demise of APP. Later, he worked variously in various jobs as dry stone builder, and after studying for a degree in publishing, he was also teaching, is a freelance editor, trainer, and educator. His most recent job before retiring was coordinator for the WOOF movement. Coming full circle, he's currently campaigning against unwanted developments in the neighbourhood of Torry here in Aberdeen, which he says is not much different from what he was doing back in 1976. Now, Andy Rigby sent me a brilliant bio in first person, so I'll just read it. I moved to the Northeast in 1970 to take a post as lecturer in sociology at Aberdeen University. Politically, I was a timid anarcho-pacifist / libertarian socialist, so I made contact with like-minded folk. That led me to being one of the founding group of APP. In 1974, I gave up my position at the university to become a full-time volunteer with APP. And I had to read that one twice because I was a bit in disbelief. Today, nobody leaves a job to volunteer. It was obviously supplemented by some occasional part-time jobs. In 1976, I managed to get a research grant to study community work practitioners in Scotland, and that addressed some of the Rigby family's financial difficulties. My involvement with APP became more part-time, focusing in particular on co-authoring two of the early local history publications, Aberdeen in the General Strike in 1977, and Fascism in Aberdeen Street Politics in the 30s, which was published in 1978. In 79, I moved back to England to teach peace studies at Bradford University. And I now feel blessed that for the remainder of my professional career, I ended up as Professor of Peace Studies at Coventry University. I was paid a salary to read, write, and teach about stuff in which I really believed, informed by the same value commitment that led to my involvement with APP all those years ago. Guys, thanks so much for taking the time to give this talk. Andy actually traveled up to Aberdeen for the first time in a few years, 30 years probably, and they are now within the context of the actual exhibition. So over to you guys.
And I think we're expecting a photograph now.
There it is, there it's coming.
This is the only photograph in existence that Ian and I appear together.
Knowingly, yes.
Knowingly. I don't know if people can tell who's who, but
I don't know if you're watching Mike, but you're there. Bill Stoko, Sandy, Sophie of the Sex Pistols, some local kids, and this was taken at Seaton Park way back when. I think in the terms of the context of the talk, I think playing football is definitely digging, as opposed to watching the game, which is dreaming, especially if you're an Aberdeen supporter. So there we were, certainly doing some digging there in the Seaton Flats.
okay.
Thanks, Newman.
So we can we get rid of that? Excuse me. So we came up with the title about diggers and dreamers because I know, speaking for myself, as a, you know, APP was not just about providing a service, printing service, publishing, you know, providing a voice for excluded groups or whoever. For me, it was also a kind of propaganda of the deed, the sort of trying to show by our activities the other ways of relating at work or in other spheres of life, other ways were possible, as the title of the exhibition here, which I've seen for the first time today. And by the way, I should say, I've come to Aberdeen for the first time for 30 years, and the sun is shining, and it's beautiful. It's absolutely beautiful. I can't believe it. It's, you know, having given all the warnings to Carol here that about all the levels of clothing you'd need coming up here. But yeah, to get back to the topic, I came up to Aberdeen as a pacifist, and that led me to anarchism, and that led me to searching for non-coercive ways of bringing about change. And that led me to this idea, you know, the idea of propaganda of the deed, but not trying to live a life in the here and now that had features of what one dreamed about in the future. And that I think, certainly I think for those of us involved with APP at the beginning, that was very much part of the vision, and the digging was the actual getting the hands dirty and trying to, in my case, trying to keep a rotoprint 3590 going as all the cogs and levers kept breaking and so on and so forth. But and I don't know about, but Ian and I kind of overlapped in a way, because by 1975, I think I was beginning to sort of move out slightly, but you were coming in.
Yeah, I mean, I moved south roughly when Andy moved north, but it sounds as though he was more politically educated when he came here than I was when, as an 18-year-old, pitched up in London in 1968. I mean, so it was a heady mix of movements, and just, you know, my head was buzzing at the time, politically naive. I very quickly began to get involved in things. I went down there wearing a suit and short hair, And within a year, my hair was down to here, my suit was gone, and I was involved in all sorts of alternative stuff. It's taken some time and some distance to reflect in a more measured way exactly what was going on there. But I think history, in a sense, has emphasized the hippie, the alternative movement aspect of that decade. Because it was new and because it was very different. But I don't think we should overemphasize it. There were a lot of different movements going on at that time, traditional labor movements and so on. But what the particular thing that struck me at the time, and it's almost like a revelation, for me was reading Silent Spring by Rachel Carson. And that started me off with an interest in environmentalism that has stayed with me since then. Silent Spring was not an optimistic book. It was a very, very bleak summary of the destruction of our environment through overuse of pesticides, raptors dying at the top of the food chain because of the accumulation of organo chlorine compounds. But despite that, and echoing what Andy's touched on, is that despite that, I and others, I think, were embarking on our activism very much with an optimistic approach that we could change things and we could change things for the better. And when we started discussing this exhibition 6 months ago, that got me thinking, because of my interest in environmentalism, looking at the very active environmental movements and protests we have current today as a response to the climate crisis. And I came up with this thesis of, are we in a position now where back then we were looking forward to utopias, but now we're looking forward to or trying to prevent dystopias? And that's really the topic, which we'll expand on a little bit. I think perhaps that thesis doesn't stand examination across the wide range of movements, as we'll see. But the dystopian element is not just, I don't think, sloganizing on behalf of extinction, rebellion, and so on, to put the fear of God into us. I think that slight worry or major worry has extended into, for example, people think twice now about having children. And some people have decided not to have children because of their fears of the future. And I was reading in The Guardian just this morning, a major survey of children has measured a major change in their mood, in their optimism or their pessimism over the last decade. It's maybe not all to do with climate change, some of it may to do with COVID and other reasons. But there does seem to be a significant shift in our thinking. So Greta Grunberg and the movements that she and others have inspired starts us talking about were we then optimistic because of our youth or because of ignorance? Andy?
Yeah. I think age might be a factor, but I think all movements for change and people who activists for change are driven by a combination, if you like, of hope and fear. Hope for a better world, for change, the possibility of change, and fear of the consequences that if we don't act to change, for change. And because certainly that's how, as we've been thinking, I've been thinking, and we've been thinking together at a distance via email. It's that kind of balance of fear and hope, and its impact on activism. And I don't think either of us would claim to have any clear answers, because certainly in the 1970s, there was the fear, there was and which towards the end of the 1970s very much was a fear of nuclear annihilation, you know, of cruise weapons, Pershing, so on and so forth. It was a very real fear. And there was a change in the sort of thinking about, you know, that nuclear war could be fought and won, you know, on the fields of Europe. But what I do feel quite strongly that those of us who were involved with Aberdeen People's Press at that time had a really strong sense of our own agency, that we could achieve things. You know, that we weren't, yeah, sure, we were dreaming, but there were grounds of hope for the fruition of that. I mean, I didn't think that I was going to see my perfect, decentralized, self-reliant local communities, you know, anarchist society, but I really felt we had the potential to make a difference, you know, where we were, not just in terms of empowering helping local groups to empower themselves, but in also showing in our everyday practice that there were different ways of organising work and so on. And you, in fact, you were involved, I think, very much eventually, turning APP into a workers, you know, doing the legal work into a workers' cooperative. And I'm not sure that the contemporary generation of activists have that same sense of possibilities, you know. And this is the kind of area that I think is for us, yeah, what we've been talking about and exploring together.
You're perfectly right about the 70s talking about the threat of nuclear annihilation, because if there ever was to be a dystopia, that would be out of that ever happened. So in that sense, that generation was no different with that particular topic. In the 70s, you know, just to clarify the statement that it wasn't all about hedonistic hippies, flowers in the hair, smoking dope and all the rest of it. The industrial disputes, labour strikes in the 70s, there hasn't been a decade since with more industrial action than there was then. And a few examples, there was the Dagenham ladies machinist strike in 1968, which led to the Equal Pay Act in 1970. We had the miners' strike in 72 and 74. We had winter of discontent later on in the decade, the Grunwick dispute, all classic labour disputes, people striving for a better life, very much then of the here and now. They weren't really thinking about utopian futures, you know, they wanted more bread on the table. So the 70s were very much that strange mix of traditional working class movements fighting for their rights and a newer generation who were more forward looking, yeah. But I also think that today, despite that, the reasons for pessimism, these are not groups who are like the survivalists in Utah and the States, you know, who are hunkering down, waiting for the global catastrophe that's going to happen the day after tomorrow. Today's activists, I think, are also, while they are pointing out where we're going if we're not careful, they're also doing things like talking about, let's take the environmental movement again, they're talking about rewilding, they're talking about redesigning urban spaces, they're talking about sustainable agriculture and forestry, and they're talking about ways of organizing society that's ultimately fairer. And they expect to see this, and they want this to happen. Do you not think that there's this balance between on the one hand saying we don't have any society at all if we don't sort out this climate change, and on the other saying, but we're also striving for something better.
Yeah, you were saying something earlier today about, we were talking about looking at Book of Visions of the book, and it was like showing people in the, you know, trying to live off the land and so on and so forth. And you were saying, you know, that back then in the 70s, there was a certain amount of antipathy towards this kind of trend from like organized labor and, you know, the people working to improve living conditions. I think my sense is that that's changed. You know, what has not changed is, as you know, probably better than me, the threat to people's livelihoods from you know, profit making. You know, when profits leave here to go somewhere and we have no idea where, and people lose their jobs, the years of austerity. I mean, what you're come back again and again, you're campaigning now about an incinerator plan in Torre, and you, from what I understand, you were campaigning about that 20 years ago, and it's come back. So these hard issues that affect people's lives directly in the here and now have remained a constant. And I think certainly with APP, we were concerned about that. I suppose I was also feeling that too much of that can cause you to lose your vision. You know, it's like we've seen I'm sorry but you know, people who start off as visionaries and they become involved in the Labour Party or whatever, and then they're forced to make choices and they end up on a slippery slope, and we end up in a situation where you can't tell the difference. You're telling me that here in Aberdeen, the Conservatives and the Labour have come to a coalition together to hold power in the local authority because they're both opposed to the nationalists. So what kind of vision is that? So that's that's a terrible loss of vision and so on and so forth. So I think that concern with the bread and butter issues is there, and it's not going away. I do think that the present movements compared with the 1970s are richer in some ways or in certain ways. I can't remember in the 1970s, some of us were concerned about the environment, not to the same extent as now. You know, I can remember thinking, yeah, we better save water, or I think we were actually thinking we better save oil because it was going to run out. You know, that was before North Sea and so on. But I think the other thing, we didn't really talk in the 70s, the global scene. The changes that have taken place in consciousness for many of us now, where we see really, you know, well, you know, and particularly under the pandemic and so forth, the world is one.
I think
we're not alone in this, and so that to me has been a big change, which sets us apart from the 1970s. Even if I'm trying to say, oh, you know, back in the 1970s, we did believe that we could make a difference, and I do have a sense now that people are kind of, we've got to act now because, you know,
we did. I mean, I think we did think we could make a difference. Some cases we could. I mean, if you take the Silent Spring and the reaction to it, it was fixed because we recognised it was caused by DDT and organic chlorine compounds. We stopped producing them and it worked. So you think there is some power there. Later on, the same thing happened with acid rain in Europe. And, you know, that was coming from dirty coal. That was stopped. We fixed more or less the hole in the ozone layer because we stopped. Yeah, we stopped producing fluorocarbons. But all of these, in a sense, were specific and local solutions, whether a country or you know. But very specific to a particular pollutant without realizing that the biggest pollutant of all was a benign substance called CO2 that we were producing in our daily lives. And the fix, rather than saying, well, all we have to do is fix that, but it's not so simple.
It's not, no, but it also, I think it does come back, because I think we're coming up to our 20 minutes, but just to finally, I think it does bring it back to the whole, you know, lifestyle, you know, which was very much part of the digging and dreaming of a new life, a different way of relating, trying to, and then the digging in terms of trying to implement that in our daily lives. And I think that this growing awareness of, if you want, a common humanity and share this globe together, this is our home, it beholds all of us to change our lifestyle to some degree. I mean, it requires political will, which seems to be in short supply. But in terms of how, you know, I mean, I know in Sweden and stuff, there's been a decline in travel by air. People get shamed for traveling by air. I mean, you know, for privileged people like myself, it's been, you know, I spent all this life earning money so I can buy a car, and now, you know, I shouldn't be driving it. So, I mean, the future is still open, and I think it's still to be struggled over. You know, let's leave it at that, should you think? Are we time's up? Nino? No.
Thanks very much, guys. It's brilliant, brilliant discussion. Can you hear me?
I hear you.
No. I will continue.
They can hear me.
Yeah. While Neil and Nuno sort out the sound, can I make one just point to sum up? I mean, when we started this exercise 6 months ago, I was very keen, in a sense, to show to the younger generation how switched on we were back then. You know, oh yeah. And some people were a bit surprised at some of the things we, oh, you actually realised that then? I thought you baby boomers were just into pensions and increasing the value of property, you know. So I was aware that actually was quite proud. I wanted to show how involved we were. But now that I've been through the whole process and thought about it and talked to younger people, activists now, you know, I wonder if we were so visionary as we thought we were, you know, because back then the carbon dioxide we were producing wasn't any better than what's being produced now. It was all started in the Industrial Revolution, you know. And it's a problem that has accrued now, but we were contributing. We weren't so wise then. Some scientists were in the 60s onwards, but it didn't percolate down to the activists. And also in other areas, like, for example, areas such as sexual politics, we were people who were white and straight and mainly male. We felt very liberal because we supported anti-racist campaigns and gay rights and so on. But it was supportive in the sense of, yeah, you guys are quite right to campaign and all that stuff, well done. We weren't really so supportive in terms of joining the campaign. Whereas nowadays, the struggle for sexual equality, for racial equality, it seems to me you don't have to be a minority to be on board with the campaign. And I think in that sense, the activists today are much more switched on than we were.
Can you hear me now? Can you hear me?
Yeah.
That's brilliant. Thanks very much, guys, for sharing your thoughts. I was listening to what you were just saying there, Ian, and I think it's absolutely brilliant, because we then don't fall into a kind of a trap. The 70s and now, young and old. I mean, I can see in your particular practice that you're still heavily involved with the protection of some of our, very, very important landscapes and communities here in Aberdeen. So I was while you guys were talking, I was thinking, does an activist ever stop doing activism?
Yeah. Yeah. No, I can remember taking my my daughter, who I don't know whether she, could walk, on a protest at some school in Aberdeen where the military were selling their wares, trying to put, and I can remember thinking back then, well, if I don't do it, what about if nobody else does it? Nowadays it's like, I don't have the energy.
I don't know. I think those of us who were involved in those days, everybody warned us about getting more conservative as we grew older. But I don't think our particular group has done that, to be honest. No. We are active we might not be on the streets so often, but we are still all, I think, active in our different ways. And I don't think, honestly, the people I know from then, I can't think of any of them who fundamentally changed and become diehard Tories.
No, I've still not joined the Labour Party.
Very good.
Would still be. I will still join the demonstrations in Coventry against nuclear weapons or whatever. But I think for me it's more a case of I salve my middle class conscience by a weekly direct debit, by a monthly direct debit to worthy causes, and feel good about it.
Very good. Well, I'm gonna open up for questions. There's about 25 people attendees, so I would like to open up again. If you want to ask a question and be seen, just let me know. I know that Andrew McGregor was asking, what role do you guys think academics, or do you think academics can bring to social movements?
Engagement for you, I think.
What's that?
What role can academics bring to social movements?
Yeah. How long have I got? My personal answer for that is that any movement has a need for what I would call critical friends. People who are supportive but who, if you want, belong and don't belong, and who can be accompany a movement as a critical friend, not challenging the values necessarily. I do think that's speaking personally as an academic, it's a real problem, because one of my particular is Palestine. And I'm from time to time, like at the moment, I feel loss of hope, and yet one has a political obligation and commitment, and a human commitment, to try and maintain hope. And you have to search for grounds for hope, and sometimes it's very difficult to find those grounds for hope, particularly in Palestine. So academics, I think, can play a very important role.
Thank you. I'm going to read out a question from Mike in Edinburgh, which is quite a long question. It refers to the Zapatistas in Mexico and the landless people's movement in Brazil, who have worked very hard to create autonomous and self-governing communities on communal land on a significant scale, and they're fighting these days still with the Brazilian government, who's constantly very violently trying to take the land off them. Within the case of the Zapatistas, their own health, education, justice, etc. systems. The Zapatistas currently have a delegation invading Europe to link with resistance here. They recently visited ZAD, which is a group, I think, in France that were fighting against an airport or a big motorway. I can't remember. Self-managed people's camp in a forest, which has successfully resisted, yes, the new airport near Nantes. Any thoughts about resistance to capitalist mega projects having the potential to increase awareness of the need for fundamental revolutionary change?
Now over to you, Ian.
Thank you. No, I mean, I think the first observation you need to make is just how many environmentalists are being murdered. There's no other word for it. They are being systematically killed in various campaigns in various continents. And some of the worst examples are in South America. But it's happening all over the place. And it's despicable. I mean, I think it's not untypical in the way that governments, certain governments today, an increasing number of governments, are behaving with impunity about things that previously they would have done secretly. Governments are now openly and with relatively little attempt to cover their tracks, killing their enemies, whether they're environmentalists or journalists or simply ordinary citizens who happen to disagree with the government. And we see it in autocratic states and dictatorships, but we're increasingly see it. I mean, India is described as the biggest democracy in the world, and yet Narendra Modi is leading a government which is using the spy phoneware that has been exposed recently to listen in to what its journalists and its opposition is saying, and it's leading to violence, beatings, imprisonments, and so on. And in response to the last part of the question, I mean, I can only say that the more apparent this becomes, and the more that the sacrifices of these brave people who oppose governments, have the courage to oppose governments when they're behaving diabolically against the environment or against their citizens, as it becomes understood globally, then the resistance surely will fall. That's all we can hope for, that more brave people come forward and are not cowed into submission.
Thank you.
Thank you. Margaret is asking, do you think the cooperative movement offers a way forward for us now in terms of organization, economy, industry?
Which cooperative movement? Yeah, sorry, I'm still thinking about Ian's response to Mike's question, and so we ended up with like talking about fear and hope, and I'm thinking now about courage. And I've always been, I'll be honest with you, I used to play football, I used to play rugby, but I don't have the courage to be on the front line. I value, and that's, I think I've just finished, this is not an advert, writing a book about constructive nonviolent action. And the reason I'm interested in that is because, I've got to find ways of bringing about change that do not involve being a martyr. There are very few, there's only people like Mike Valance, who have the courage. I respect Mike, and so on, but I'm not like him. So to come back to the question about the cooperative movement, yeah, I've been reading and writing a little bit about the workers' cooperative movements in Spain, and then I discovered that the examples there have been taken up in the Rust Belt cities of the USA, in Cleveland and elsewhere. and you know, and of course the fundamental values of caring for one another rather than competing against each other, you know. But again, the cooperative movement faces challenges that I think Mike's also alluded to in his question of these bigger forces. You know, the cooperative movement, if you want to set up a workers' cooperative, you're still competing with the other companies driven purely by profit and self-interest. And sometimes it doesn't work. But yeah, I think one has to have the courage to keep on believing in what we believe in. And I certainly show, you know, my values haven't changed, but I think my courage has declined.
I think it's fair to say, I mean, the cooperative movement in the UK has not, you know, it's ticking over, but it's not really grown. Where cooperatives have formed, they've not always been a success. The reasons for that, I think, are mixed. I think Andy's right. It's because we're competing I mean, we need more to change than simply have cooperative structures, in other words. We need a bigger societal change in which all human activities would be cooperative, but not necessarily with a big C in the term of registered industrial cooperatives. Yeah. We need to develop more cooperative thought, I think, generally.
But also, I mean, when APP became a workers' cooperative, there was a lot of encouragement and funding coming from the Labour government and Wedgwood Burn and so on, you know, and that's gone.
It's gone, yeah.
And so, I mean, again, it comes back to we operate within structures and institutional values, you know, that you cannot ignore. And it's, if I can go back, you know, one of the, you mentioned about Silent Spring, one of the big things I had was, influenced me was it Schumacher?
Yeah.
And he argued, you know, that these changes that people dream about, you know, they're going to come about because there's going to come a time when people realize that that's the change that is needed. And I still believe in that. You know, we can keep talking about our dreams, but until there's going to come a point where people see that those dreams have a substance to it that touches their lives, other people's lives. And so I'm still searching for non-violent ways of bringing about a more livable, more human, and more humane kind of society.
Thanks for that. Mike was just adding there that it's not only repressive governments, but also multinationals that are involved in violent actions against landless movement and Zapatistas. I don't know if are there any other questions from the attendees. If not, or while you ask the question, maybe we could ask Andy to plug his book and to tell us a little bit more about the book that you just wrote, Andy.
What?
Plug your book.
Oh, I don't want to do that. It's not in my nature. Yeah, it's basically, I mean, like with the APP, it's like working for change that is not on the front line. That I think is very important. And I would say one of the things that I feel critical towards XR, because the focus seems to be on disruption and getting arrested in order to bring this issue to the fore so that it cannot be ignored. You cannot ignore us. And I suppose I'm again and again wanting to say, you know, I'm frightened of going to jail. I don't want to go to jail. I'm claustrophobic. You know, I suffer from various kinds of things. I want to know, okay, I think there should be more effort on showing these are what we can do now, digging for the future, which is other than getting arrested or getting, being on that kind of frontline martyrdom trail.
But Andy, do you not think that, I mean, there's a time and a place for getting arrested? You don't have, because you do it at one point in your life, you don't have to feel guilty because you don't do it for the rest of your life.
Yeah.
I mean, one of the first things that hit me when I went to London was I just missed it, but the aftermath of the Grosvenor Square demonstration against the Vietnam War was still, the ripples were still, spreading out from that. It ended up being violent, but a lot of the people who went there were holding peace signs and flowers in their hair, And I don't think you have to criticize Extinction Rebellion for doing something that you don't want to do yourself.
No,
If that's the way they want to proceed, no.
Yeah, I'm not. I think I'm trying to be a critical friend. I would like to see more focus on these are the changes that we can make in our lives. No, I'm not disputing the fact that at certain times you need to be counted.
Yeah, I'm sure you have been yourself.
Yeah, well, yeah.
What's the title? What's the title of the book, Andy?
Oh, it doesn't give up, does it? It's not really been decided. It's but the working title is Sowing Seeds for the Future.
Okay.
And then it's got a subtitle. But the idea of planting seeds for the future, digging and dreaming.
Yeah.
Digging to make the dreams come true, if you want. So that's the focus.
Very good. I've got.
Thank you, Nuno. But I want people to know it's Nuno that's pushing this, not me.
Exactly. I take all the blame on that one. Dave is asking the question, what do you think of the idea of the enabling state? Can empowerment ever come from above?
I personally think it can come from the state, but in that case, I wouldn't call it from above, because it would be a state that would simply be enabled by the people. So to enable, it has to be enabled in the first place to allow it to enable, if you like. It's a state that is operating with the people's consent. And I mean, I think there are some small examples of that in Scandinavia, perhaps. I mean, they have they're not unified in their approach to government, and they have different parties and opposition, but there's a certain level at which the state is trusted. And when it's trusted, I think it can act in a way that gives people confidence to change and accepts, and it also accepts difficult decisions. There's a lot of talk about nudge theory and so on as one arm of the. Is it rather than passing a law or saying you shall not eat sugar, you provide little hints and nudges and education and so on, and people will change voluntarily with consent. That's maybe a much smaller example than the questioner's asking, but I think I personally do feel that the state has a role to play.
Yeah, well, I mean, we referred earlier, didn't we, or I did, or we did, to the growth of workers' cooperatives in the 80s. Under the Labour government. So clearly, I mean, there's no question. The state is one of the structural contexts in which we act, and therefore it's not irrelevant. And I personally do believe that's why I have a pink and grey flag at home, not a black and red one. you know, I do believe, you know, the state is a crucial factor, I think. Yeah.
Very good. Chris Aldred is saying that the sense of doom was maybe there in the 70s too. She says, I was convinced at the time that the world was doomed because of overpopulation. My response then brought together an odd mix of eco-interest and feminism to campaign for access to birth control. So what do you think might be some of these odd mixed views now that you can bring together?
Yeah, I think that's population control was shifting responsibility to something that wasn't to blame effectively. I mean, clearly, if there are fewer people on the planet, there are fewer resources to be used. But all of the analysis over the years has suggested that there has always been enough food and more to feed the population that we have. I don't think personally that population is a problem. The population is resource use. And Chris will know well that, you know, the American population, for example, and many Western nations per person are using 10 times as many resources as the many millions, the hordes of people that are described in Asia and so on. So I think a lot of arguments against population control were and still are promulgated by people who are effectively saying that poorer people shouldn't have children, but the rich people should carry on with their lifestyle uninterrupted. So I think that's why it's become a distorted argument then and now. And in any case, you know, as education continues to expand, especially amongst girls, populations in many countries are beginning to level off. And I think the current projections are that even without any attempt at forced population control, a global population of 9 billion will probably peak at that point. Andy?
No, I don't have anything to add to that.
No.
Yeah. I'm thinking, what's an odd mix? I'm not.
Yeah, maybe maybe I did miss a little bit of that question, so if I've answered it incorrectly, forgive me, but maybe there's another dimension to other odd mixes. There are other odd mixes in the sense that some of the things that seemed important then, I mean, one example in my campaigning lifetime is that there was a huge demonstration against the building of the Torness nuclear reactor in East Lothian in 1979, various protests. And that the attempt to stop that was not that different about some of the attempts against to force our change on our attitude to climate. But it was seen then, absolutely, we must not have nuclear power. Today we see some Greens who've shifted on that.
That answers the question,
because of the fact that it doesn't produce any CO2.
Yeah.
So environmentally, that's a shift. Personally, I still think storing up waste is not enough. It's still too much of a reason to not to do it personally. Yeah. But it's an example of
that is an odd mix. That's a strange mix, when George Monbiot starts advocating nuclear power.
That's right.
Yeah. Well, yeah.
We're nearly getting to the end of our time. I've got a couple of questions here. I've got our Alan Marshall asking, is there less activism now? How is the amount of activism measured or calculated? He says, I think it would be a mistake to overestimate the force of activism in the 1970s. And conversely, to believe that the privatization of everything, including knowledge, in our everyday lives has stifled individual resistance and people's ability to maintain a critical distance from dominant ideology. That's not a question, it's a comment around, how do we measure this? Is this, things now are very visible, they're being filmed, constantly filmed through social media. Does it mean that there's more of it? How would we measure the amount of activism during the 1970s? Just a caution, not to kind of maybe overestimate what was going on. Ishbel Shand is saying on the topic of getting arrested, the former NASA climate scientist Jim Hansen is spending his retirement getting arrested. And Kevin Anderson, former director of climate research at the Tyndall Center, recently called for environmental scientists to get arrested. The frustration level is becoming acute. And again, that's just a comment. Chris, now to finish, says that her real point was that we do not always see the inconsistencies of our political views as you people or as members of new movements. Sorry, I can't really fully understand that comment. Anyway, we'll draw to a close. It's been brilliant to have you guys around, actually, in the space of the exhibition. Sorry for the technical glitches. They're always to be expected, but you guys did a stellar job once again. I also would like to thank all the attendees. There's been about 25 people who took the time to attend this talk. It will, I should have said in the beginning, it's been recorded. I said it in the notes there. In the next few days, we'll make sure that both Dave and this talk is on Peacock's YouTube channel. Thanks very much, guys, and it's been a pleasure.
Okay, can we just thank everyone for turning up as well?
Yeah.
Let's appreciate that.
Yeah, and thank you, Nuno.
Thank you, Nuno.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.